Now you guys have probably seen videos on these two already, and it's the all-new Razr Plus or Razr 50 Ultra and the Razr, also known as the Razr 50. Now I've been using these two phones for an entire month now, and I think these two phones are a great addition to an ever-growing list of flip phones over the last few years. Now, I feel like flips or foldables are still coming in waves, and while I haven't seen a ton of people out there using flip phones, I think what Moto's doing here on the Razr line can help really move the needle when it comes to flip phones. So before we talk more about the phones, let's talk specs, and let's start with the baseline Razr. The new 2024 Razr is packing the MediaTek Dimensity 7300X processor, which is a mid-range chip, and we'll talk more about that later in the video. Now, the biggest upgrade I'd say for the Razr this year is the external display, which is now a 3.6-inch screen that has 120 Hz refresh rate, and it looks awesome. Now, you can access most, if not all, your apps on this external display. On the inside, though, you're getting a massive 6.9-inch 120 Hz display that's brighter than last year's base Razr. And last but not least, you have dual cameras, a 50 megapixel main camera, as well as a 13 megapixel ultra-wide camera. On the Razr Plus, though, you're getting the Snapdragon 8S Gen 3, which I know, not the best processor for a flagship flip phone, but still, it's decent enough. You're also getting 12 gigs of RAM here, 256 gigs of storage, and a smaller 4000 mAh battery with up to 45 watts of wired charging. The external display here is a 4-inch display that looks really beautiful. Both the inside and outside screen gets very bright and goes up to 165 Hz, but in reality, these are almost always running at 120 Hz and will dip down to 1 Hz to save on battery thanks to LTPO. Now you're also getting dual 50 megapixel cameras on here, but the weird thing about the cameras on the Plus this year is that the second camera is a 2x camera, which I think should have been an ultra wide instead. But more on the cameras later in the video. Now, going back to its design and the display real quick, both phones are pretty much identical when it comes to form factor and how it feels in hand. Both phones are using vegan leather, although the side frames on the Razr Plus are glossy stainless steel frames, while the regular Razr is using a matte finish on its aluminum frame. And when it comes to the display, I obviously prefer the larger external display on the Plus since I feel more comfortable using apps on a slightly bigger display. And whenever I'm playing games on the outer display, it just feels better and things are just more legible. But the regular Razr ain't all that bad. And on the inside, you'll notice that the crease on both phones are barely visible, and you can also barely feel the crease here too, which is awesome. Now, however, I will note that the regular Razr's hinge, even though it's been redesigned this year, it's not as stiff as the one on the Plus. The Plus seems to hold on to its position a lot better than on the regular Razr. This one just seems to close a lot easier compared to the Plus, which may or may not be a bad thing. But yeah, in terms of what you can do with the outer display though, it's literally the same exact experience on both phones. You can use your apps, check your notifications, use widgets, play games on it. There's no difference if you got the more expensive one or the cheaper one, which is great. All right, and then we have the performance and battery life and software. So starting off with the Plus this time, we have the Snapdragon 8S Gen 3 on here, which is basically a rebadged Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with some AI functionalities. Now, I would have preferred to have the latest 8 Gen 3 here, the non-S model, just because we all know how that chip is more efficient and a little bit more powerful than what you can get out of this current chip that's on this phone. And given that the Plus has a slightly smaller battery, I think it would have made more sense to go with a more efficient chipset here, but to be honest, battery life wasn't terrible for me. From my experience with this phone, I'm able to average about 6.5 to 7 hours of battery life on this phone, which is not bad at all. But when I went and used the outer display for most days, it would last even longer since it's using a lot less energy, which would then turn the phone to an all-day phone. And then when it comes to performance, I have no complaints whatsoever. Everything felt really snappy from launching the apps, scrolling on the home screen, browsing the web or browsing social. Everything just felt really smooth here. Gaming in particular was pretty fun too, especially on a massive display like the one on this Razr Plus. I've had no problems playing heavy demanding games like Genshin Impact here, and it's almost always at 60 frames per second in low to medium settings. As for the Razr and its MediaTek Dimensity 7300X processor, it's a mid-range device, but I can't lie and say that this performed as good as the Snapdragon on the Plus model. For a brand new phone that's around $700, this could be a whole lot better in terms of performance. I am able to game on it just fine, but Genshin Impact, for example, I can only push to about 45 frames per second, and other games would limit the frame rate to 30 just because there's just not enough power on this chip. But in terms of battery efficiency though, I'm able to get about the same amount of screen on time as the Plus, which is pretty good. And if you use the cover display a ton, you'll get even more battery life, which is great. But despite its not so great performance, considering what else you have on this phone, a flip form factor, a 4200 milliamp hour battery, a nice external display, I think the Razr is still a really good phone. Now, when it comes to software, I'd say it's a pretty vanilla experience with a sprinkle of Motorola here and there. There's some features that are Motorola exclusive, like, their gestures, which if you do a chopping gesture, that'll turn on the flashlight, or if you twist your wrist twice, that'll activate the camera. Little things that adds something cool to the overall experience, which makes the Razr a little bit more unique compared to other flip phones or smartphones in general. I also love that you can launch almost all of the apps that you have on your phone on this external display, which is a hassle to do on, other flip phones. So big props to Motorola for letting us use the external display to its full potential. All right, now let's talk cameras. Now, I'm not really sure what Motorola was thinking here with the Plus. I kind of wish this really used an ultra wide camera here with a slightly better sensor and higher megapixel, since that 50 megapixel main camera can technically zoom in digitally to achieve that 2x zoom look, which we actually have on the regular Razr. I think this is a huge L for the Plus, and I think flip users would want an ultra wide camera as their secondary, especially if, they want better group selfies using the external display. But besides that, how do the photos look out of the Razr and Razr Plus? So starting off with the Razr Plus, I think they look pretty good in good lighting. The shots don't look overly processed with natural colors, with a hint of extra saturation in the photos. I don't think the photos look bad by any means. It's just, it looks like any other flip phone camera I've used in the last year or two. The 2x zoom is pretty decent as well, although it does struggle in low light scenarios where, it would hunt for focus. There's also no OIS on that zoom lens, which is probably why it struggles in low light shots. But besides that, I'd say it's slightly worse than the main wide camera, but if you have ample lighting, it's pretty good. Now, for the regular Razr, I was actually hoping it would look similar to the Razr Plus, but there's kind of an excessive over-processing happening here. And I believe both the main 50 megapixel sensor are the same in both phones, so this really just comes down to how the photos are processed after the fact. And yeah, I noticed that the photos look just a bit too sharp, too contrasty, and doesn't look as natural as the Razr Plus. However, like I mentioned earlier, I love having that ultra-wide camera on the regular Razr. I think this is honestly, the better choice when it comes to taking group photos or selfies, since you're getting such a wide field of view. Quality-wise, the ultra-wide is just okay. If it was a higher resolution sensor, maybe it would have been better, but honestly, I think Motorola just needs to fine-tune its post-processing on the Razr a little bit more, because the shots I'm getting out of this regular Razr is just not that great, and I know that they can do better here. And so to wrap it all up for you guys, the new 2024 Moto Razr and Moto Razr Plus are awesome upgrades over last year's Razr line, and I think the entry into the flip phone category has gotten better over the years, especially on the regular Razr because of the price tag. Now, for $700 without any discounts or carrier deals, I think the Razr is an awesome pickup. But I wish the processor was, just a little bit better than what's on here. While it's still usable and I think everyday consumers will find the phone to be good, I just don't personally love its performance. Everything else about the phone though, I did like the bigger external display, the battery life, the inclusion of that ultra-wide camera, the build quality, and of course, the color choices. I think this phone is going to be a really popular phone for a ton of people, and this is actually going to be the Razr that I would recommend everyone pick up this year. As much as I love the new Razr Plus, that $1,000 entry price is a little bit too steep for a hardware that's not going to offer you the best of the best. Samsung's Flip 6, while it's $100 more than this, it offers a better flagship chip inside, same camera setup as the Galaxy S24, and offers a little bit more refined hardware. But if you want a new flip phone and you don't need the fastest chip available, definitely look into the Moto Razr this year, because it's a pretty good flip phone that won't necessarily break the bank, especially if you trade in your old phone or have carrier deals that you can take advantage of. I think you're really gonna like it, and I'm sure it'll only get better with software updates, so long as Motorola actually updates its phones on a more consistent basis. But that's another topic for a different video. Anyways, make sure you guys stay tuned to the channel if you guys want to know more about the new Galaxy Z Flip 6 and the Z Fold 6 and all the other accessories that they launch at this year's Unpacked event. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one.